Okay, so in this tutorial, I'm going to walk you through a function that I made to govern fights with our monsters. So this function, what I created here was a function using the def keyword, and I'm going to call this function fight, and we're going to pass as a parameter into this function a monster. So basically what I'll be able to do here is pass in one of the monsters that I've created using my monster class up here, and this fight function will govern the whole fight between my hero and that monster. So the first thing that it's going to do when the fight begins is it's going to print the monster's description. So this will print out to the user one time, and it'll tell the user what kind of monster they're fighting. And then what it'll do is it'll put us into a while loop that will start the fight. And so basically we want to keep this fight going while the monster is alive and the hero is alive. Because if the monster dies or if the hero dies, the fight ends. So I do that by checking to see whether the monster's hit points are greater to 0 and whether the hero's hit points are greater to 0. And if both of those things are the case, then I ask the user, do you want to fight or run away? And I ask for the user's input. Now, the next thing that I do is I need to evaluate fighting and running away. But I use the same data to evaluate that. Now, the way that I'm doing this is a very, very simple combat function. You can do a lot of things to make this more complicated and to add a little bit of strategy to your game. This is something that's really, really simple. Is I'm creating a strength value that's equivalent, that's a random number that's between 1 and the number of hit points that my hero has. And so this will give a kind of a random roll for the hero that's based on their strength. So if my hero comes up against the dragon and my hero's strength is 20, then my hero will get something between 1 and 20 as its strength value. Now I have the monster strength as a random integer between 1 and the number of hit points that the monster has. So if the hero comes up against the dragon and the dragon's hit point total is 40, the dragon will get a random value between 1 and 40. So it's possible that the hero will hit the dragon and do damage, but not as probable as it is if the hero is going up against something that has a hit point value of like 5. And so what I do here is I compare the hero's strength to the strength of the monster. So the damage is equivalent to the hero's strength minus the monster strength. What this means is if the hero ends up with a strength value of, say, 16, and the monster ends up with a strength value of 12, then the hero will do 4 damage to the monster. Alternately, if the hero ends up with a strength value of 16 and the monster ends up with a strength value of 24, then the monster will end up doing 8 damage to the hero. And so that's what I'm setting up here with just these 2 very quick lines using this random integer function and doing a little bit of comparison. Okay, so now I'm going to handle my inputs. I gave the user 2 options here. I want the user to choose whether to fight or to run away. And so if the user inputs fight, then I check the damage. If the damage is less than 0, that means that the monster's strength was greater than the hero's strength, right, because of this equation right here. Then I'm going to print the name of the monster hit you, causing the amount of damage. Now notice I took that integer that was created by this equation, that variable damage there, and now I'm turning that into a string. Then I call my hero method change hit points, and I feed into that method the damage. And I do that in order to take those hit points away from my hero. Now if the damage is greater than 0, that means that the monster was hit by the hero and the hero has now done damage to the monster. So I print out that I hit the monster, causing the amount of damage that I caused, and then I change the monster's hit points to deal that damage. Now, the else case here deals with what happens if the damage is equivalent to 0, because in that case, the monster and the hero tied. And so in that case, we just circle each other menacingly, and you ask the question again, do you want to fight or run away? Okay, so then what happens if the hero wants to run away? Well, I wanted to give the hero that option because I didn't want you to get stuck into a fight that you're not quite ready for. And so what we do there is I borrowed something here from one of my favorite card games, a game called Munchkin, where if you want to run away from a monster that's way too powerful for you, you roll a die. And if your roll is a 5 or a 6, you get to run away. If your roll is a 4 or under, you have to face and fight the monster. So I decided to change it a little bit here and basically have the monster attack you as you run away, doing a little bit of damage. So you do a random roll. This is giving me a random number between 1 and 6. If that number is greater than 4, then I get away from the monster unscathed. If the number is less than or equal to 4, then as I run away, the monster makes a final desperate attack, and it does damage to me. I forgot to do something here when I was doing this. I need to do hero.change hit points, and then change the hit points by the damage. Okay. And I need to check to see whether that damage is whether the monster is actually doing damage. So I'm going to have to play around with this a little bit later. Actually, the way I would do this is by saying if damage is greater than 0, then the monster can do damage and cause me problems. Okay. It has to be less than 0 because that's what makes it so the monster wins. So there you go. So now that's my while loop. So this will continue to run as long as one of the two of us is still alive. If the monster's hit points are greater than 0, or if my hit points are greater than 0. Now, after my while loop is over, then I need to deal with what happens when I defeat the monster. So what I do here is I check to see whether the monster's hit points are less than or equal to 0. That means the monster would be dead. If that is the case, then I take a bunch of loot from the monster. So I have to do two things here. One of the things that I want to do is I want to go through the list of loot that the monster carries, and I want to add it to my hero's inventory. I also want to go through that list and I want to display it to my users so they know what's being added to their inventory. So that's what I'm doing here, creating this loot string. I create an empty string, and then I go for item in monster.loot. Loot string equals loot string plus item description plus a space. So what this is doing is it's creating a string of loot that I'm going to display to the user in this next print line. Now, what I realized here just now is that I actually went through that monster.loot item twice, and I can actually do a little bit of refactoring here because I also need to add to the hero's inventory. So I'm going to do that. And so I don't have to have this for loop in here anymore. So I only have to do that once. And then I'm going to print that I beat the monster, I took the loot, and the monster is now dead. So what I'm doing is I'm changing that flag that I created on my monster class to isDead equals true. And I'm going to use that later on in my locations to check whether the monster is dead to see whether or not the monster is going to attack. Now I also have to deal with what happens if the hero dies. And so elif hero.hitpoints is less than or equal to 0. As your life drains out of you, the last thing you see is the monster standing over you laughing. And game over is now equal to true, and this will then kick us out of our game loop. So this is one way to deal with a fight scenario, and you're going to see how we bring it all together and use this fight scenario in our actual game in the next video.